The universe was vast, filled with countless species that lived, thrived, and died. Among them, the Calther Empire stood unrivaled in its brutality. For centuries, they had scoured the galaxy, conquering worlds and collecting specimens for their bloody gladiatorial games. Their thirst for violence, for carnage, knew no bounds. They prided themselves on finding the fiercest creatures, the most terrifying beasts. But now, their curiosity was piqued by whispers of a planet on the far edges of the galaxy, a so-called Death World. A planet teeming with lifeforms that had survived conditions that would crush or annihilate other species. Earth. To the Calther, Earth sounded promising. Rumors of monsters that roamed its lands, beasts that could tear apart anything in their path, and survivalists hardened by the brutality of their own environment intrigued them. Primitive, perhaps, but certainly promising in terms of blood sport. When their scouts arrived, what they found didn't quite match the tales they had heard. The creatures weren't towering monstrosities with endless claws or fangs. Instead, they found fragile-looking beings, humans. Soft skin, weak muscle structure, limited weaponry. This wasn't the material of nightmares. These weren't the predators they were promised. But still, the Calther decided to abduct a small group and throw them into the games. If nothing else, the fragile creatures would at least provide a quick show, a few minutes of desperate screams before they were torn apart by the beasts of the arena. Inside the alien ship, a group of confused and frightened humans huddled together. They had been snatched from their homes, their cities, their lives. They didn't understand the language of their captors, but the intention was clear: they were to be used for sport. Among them were soldiers, athletes, hunters, and ordinary citizens, all trying to make sense of what had just happened to them. Some were angry, some were scared, but all knew they had to survive. When they were thrust into the arena, surrounded by towering alien spectators and the oppressive heat of an alien sun, the gravity of their situation sank in. Across from them stood the beasts the Calther were known for, hulking, vicious creatures from worlds unimaginable to the human mind. Their eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger, their claws sharp enough to rend flesh from bone. The humans had no time to comprehend the magnitude of their challenge. The first roar signaled the beginning of the carnage. But it wasn't chaos. Not for long. The humans didn't scatter, didn't scream in terror. They moved quickly, instinctively, forming tight groups, using their surroundings to their advantage. The Calther watched in confusion at first. This wasn't how prey usually behaved. The humans didn't rush headlong into death. Instead, they analyzed. They adapted. The soldiers barked orders, forming a line of defense while others improvised weapons from the debris littering the arena floor. They worked together, using a mix of military training, survival instincts, and raw determination to stay alive. Their first opponent, a beast from the planet Krindos, charged. It was all muscle, bone, and rage, a creature designed for killing. The humans didn't meet its strength with brute force. They didn't need to. They worked together, like clockwork, setting traps with debris, baiting the creature into a tight corner before launching a coordinated attack. They used its momentum against it, toppling it with cleverness rather than raw strength. The crowd above, expecting quick slaughter, instead watched in stunned silence as the humans brought down the creature. The first kill wasn't celebrated, not by the humans. There was no time. The next beast was released, even more vicious than the first. But the pattern continued: survive, adapt, and conquer. The Calther, who had once looked down at the humans with condescension, began to shift uneasily in their seats. What they had brought to their arena wasn't mindless prey. It was something far more dangerous. Something that could think, strategize, and most terrifyingly, win. By the time the day's games ended, not a single human had fallen. The alien creatures that had once ruled the arena lay dead or dying, and the Calther, for the first time in their empire's long and violent history, were at a loss for words. The humans stood in the blood-soaked sand of the arena, their breaths heavy, their bodies worn from the constant fight for survival. But they weren't broken. The initial shock had worn off, and now, they understood the rules of this twisted game. It wasn't just about brute strength. It was about outthinking the enemy, about using the environment, their minds, and each other to stay alive. And that's what terrified the Calther. The crowd above had grown restless. Their hunger for mindless violence hadn't been satisfied by the day's events. They wanted more blood, more chaos. The humans hadn't provided that. Instead, they had shown discipline, intelligence, and control, things the Calther couldn't comprehend in their concept of entertainment. In response to the humans' survival, the Calther leadership grew increasingly frustrated. This wasn't the spectacle they had anticipated. They had promised their audience monsters savagery. And instead they had delivered a species that, despite its lack of raw power, refused to die easily. Something had to change. The next day's battles were different. The humans, now fully aware of their situation, prepared themselves as best they could with the limited resources available. But this time, the Calther had increased the stakes. They released not just one or two beasts, but entire waves of them. The creatures were faster, more agile, and more ruthless than those they had faced before. But the humans didn't flinch. They adapted, just as they always did. The first wave came at them with sheer force, dozens of beasts charging from all sides. The humans moved swiftly, breaking off into smaller teams, luring the creatures into traps, striking at their weakest points. They had no weapons, no armor, nothing that could match the sheer physicality of their opponents. But they had something far more valuable: strategy. A soldier barked orders, coordinating the group as though they were back on Earth, fighting in a war zone. "Move in pairs! Take them down one by one!" he shouted. And they did. With every strike, every maneuver, the humans showed the Calther something they couldn't understand: unity. They weren't individuals fighting for their own survival. They were a team, each working toward the same goal. They weren't just surviving, they were dominating. The Calther grew desperate. They threw more at the humans, bigger, deadlier creatures, ones that had crushed entire civilizations in the past. But it didn't matter. The humans fought as though their very existence depended on it, because it did. And with each victory, their confidence grew. They weren't the prey here. They were something far more dangerous. Among the group, there were no cries of victory, no time to rest. Every battle was followed by quick planning, every pause filled with the sound of breathing, of strategy being whispered. The humans had learned quickly that there would be no help coming. They were alone in this alien hell, surrounded by enemies, but that only made them more dangerous. It wasn't just about the beasts anymore. The humans knew the real enemy was watching from above, judging their every move, waiting for a mistake. And that's where they turned their focus. The Calther were powerful, yes, but they weren't invincible. They had weaknesses, and the humans were beginning to spot them. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore, it was a chess game, and the humans were starting to play. The Calther didn't see it coming. In their arrogance, they thought they had the upper hand. They thought they could throw more at the humans, and eventually, they'd break. But humans don't break easily. They evolve, adapt, and overcome. The next wave of creatures hit the arena, but by now, the humans were ready. They had studied their patterns, learned their weaknesses, and understood how to take them down. But it wasn't just about killing the beasts anymore. It was about sending a message. The humans weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting to show the Calther what real power looked like. As the beasts fell, one by one, the crowd above grew quieter. The Calther's bloodlust began to shift into something else. Fear. It was subtle at first, a murmur through the arena. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. And not just with brute force. They were using their intellect, their cunning, and their unyielding will. The Calther were beginning to realize that they had misjudged their opponents. These weren't just creatures from some backwater planet. These were survivors, fighters, and strategists. And they were dangerous. As the last of the beasts fell, the humans stood victorious once again. The Calther, for all their power and cruelty, had underestimated the most important aspect of humanity: their ability to fight not just with their bodies, but with their minds. The humans looked up at their captors, bloodied and bruised but unbroken, and for the first time, the Calther felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. The games were changing. And the humans weren't just playing along anymore, They were rewriting the rules. The humans' victories had begun to shift the dynamic, but the Calther were not ready to admit defeat. They were too proud, too entrenched in their belief of superiority. Instead of scaling back the games, they made them crueler, more twisted. The humans weren't just fighting beasts anymore. They were fighting creatures specifically engineered to exploit their weaknesses: poisonous claws, creatures with camouflaging abilities, and others that could attack from a distance with precision. Yet, every new horror the Calther unleashed seemed only to sharpen the humans. They adapted faster with every battle. What had started as a scramble for survival had evolved into something methodical, a war of attrition they were winning through intelligence, resilience, and sheer willpower. The humans didn't have access to the advanced technology of their captors, but they made do with what little they could scavenge from the arena after each fight. Improvised weapons, traps built from the environment, and even using the dead bodies of their enemies as shields, it was all part of their plan. They used everything at their disposal, nothing wasted. The Calther were becoming desperate. Each new attempt to crush the human spirit only seemed to provoke them further. The humans had turned this arena into their battlefield, and the Calther were no longer in control. The crowds began to feel it, too. What had once been raucous cheers and bloodthirsty roars from the audience had quieted. The spectacle was shifting. The Calther had once wanted to see their champions tear apart helpless prey. Now they were witnessing something different: the rise of an unstoppable force, a species that refused to be broken. The humans weren't afraid of death. That's what set them apart from everything else in the arena. They fought like they had nothing left to lose. Among the humans, there was a quiet determination. They didn't revel in their victories, didn't gloat after every battle won. They knew the real war wasn't in the arena, it was against the Calther themselves. They had seen the cracks in their captors' arrogance. The humans knew that the Calther feared losing control, and that was exactly what was happening. With every fight, the Calther lost more of their grip. The humans weren't just battling for survival anymore, they were studying their captors, learning how to break the system from within. Then came the turning point. The humans had been gathering information, observing every detail. They noticed the patterns in the way the Calther sent out their beasts, the timing of the waves, and the subtle shifts in the arena's structure. They also began to understand the Calther technology, the force fields that kept them trapped, the surveillance systems that watched their every move, and the weaknesses in the design. What the Calther didn't know was that the humans had been preparing, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment had arrived. As the next battle loomed, the humans executed their plan with precision. They didn't just fight the beasts. They manipulated the environment in ways the Calther hadn't anticipated. They used the creature's own strength against them, turning the arena into a death trap for the beasts. The humans moved with such efficiency and precision that, within minutes, the Calther lost control of the fight. Their engineered monsters fell, one after another, and the humans didn't stop there. They began to dismantle the arena itself. Using the weapons they had crafted and the knowledge they had gathered, they targeted the systems controlling the arena's force fields. It was a gamble, but one they were willing to take. If they failed, they would all be killed. But if they succeeded, they would show the Calther exactly what happens when you push humanity too far. In the chaos that followed, the Calther watched in horror as the humans ripped through the arena's defenses. They had underestimated their captives' intelligence, their ability to adapt, and most importantly, their will to survive. The humans weren't just fighting for their lives anymore, they were fighting for their freedom, for revenge, for every moment of suffering they had endured at the hands of the Calther. As the force fields flickered and failed, the humans broke free from the confines of the arena. What the Calther had intended as a simple, brutal display of dominance had turned into an uprising. The humans, once seen as weak and insignificant, had risen up, showing their captors the true meaning of resilience. The Calther had brought them here to die, but instead, the humans had turned the arena into a battlefield where they were the victors. It wasn't over yet. The humans knew that escaping the arena was only the first step. But they had sent a message, loud and clear. They weren't prey. They weren't weak. And they weren't going to stop. The Calther had wanted to see monsters. Now they were realizing the truth. The real monsters were the ones standing before them, human and unbroken, eyes filled with the promise of retribution. The humans' escape from the arena had triggered a ripple of panic throughout the Calther Empire. They had assumed that humans were primitive, incapable of mounting any serious threat. Now, the Empire's leaders found themselves facing an enemy they had completely underestimated. What had begun as entertainment had transformed into an insurrection, one that threatened the very stability of their society. The humans, now loose within the heart of Calther territory, moved with purpose. They didn't scatter or hide. Instead, they methodically sabotaged the infrastructure around them, using every bit of knowledge they had acquired during their captivity. They struck supply lines, disabled communication systems, and dismantled security networks, turning the Calther's own technology against them. Every action was precise, calculated, and devastating. The Empire, so reliant on control, began to fracture under the pressure. The Calther, unaccustomed to being on the defensive, floundered as they tried to regain order. Their pride had blinded them to the real danger, the humans' ability to turn every weakness into an opportunity. The humans were no longer merely fighting for survival. They were dismantling the Calther from within, piece by piece. As chaos spread, the humans made their way to the seat of Calther power. They had studied their captors well, learning the locations of key facilities, including the central command hub. The Calther had assumed that their superior technology would keep the humans at bay, but they had underestimated the depth of human resolve. The humans weren't here to conquer. They were here to ensure that the Calther never threatened them, or anyone else, again. With every step, the humans showcased what the Calther had failed to understand from the beginning. It wasn't physical strength or technological superiority that made humans dangerous. It was their adaptability, their ability to unite under pressure, and their unwavering determination to fight for their freedom. Where the Calther had grown complacent, believing their empire was untouchable, the humans had been pushed to the edge, and in doing so, had become something far more terrifying than the Empire could have imagined. Inside the command hub, the Calther leadership gathered in desperation. They had no idea how to counter this enemy. Every attempt to regain control of their systems was thwarted. Every effort to mount a defense was dismantled before it even began. The humans, with their seemingly limitless ability to improvise and adapt, had turned the Empire's strengths into vulnerabilities. It wasn't long before the humans breached the command center. But they didn't storm in with reckless abandon. They moved with precision, having learned the layout, anticipating every trap, and exploiting every flaw. By the time the Calther leaders even realized the humans had entered, it was too late. The humans had already shut down the Empire's defense grid, leaving the entire planet vulnerable. Standing face to face with their captors, the humans made no grand declarations of victory. There were no speeches, no threats. The Calther had wanted monsters for their games, creatures to entertain them through violence and fear. But the humans had shown them something far worse, the capacity to turn desperation into destruction. The Calther now understood that the real monsters weren't the mindless beasts they had bred for combat, but the quiet, unyielding determination of a species that refused to be enslaved. As the humans disabled the last of the Calther's systems, plunging their empire into darkness, they made one final move. They broadcasted a message, not of conquest or domination, but a warning. To every corner of the galaxy, the message was clear: humanity would not seek revenge, nor would they seek to rule. But any who dared to challenge them, who underestimated their will to survive, would face the same fate as the Calther. It wasn't humanity that was monstrous. It was what humanity became when pushed to its limits. The humans left, disappearing into the shadows of space, leaving the shattered remains of the Calther Empire behind. The empire that had once thrived on arrogance, cruelty, and violence had been brought to its knees not by brute force, but by the very thing it sought to exploit. The galaxy, having witnessed the downfall of one of its most powerful empires, would never look at humans the same way again. They had wanted monsters for their entertainment, but instead they had unleashed something far more terrifying, a species that could not be broken, that thrived on adversity, and that, when threatened, became the ultimate force of survival. The Calther had been wrong. The humans weren't monsters. They were something worse, something that could never be caged or controlled. Something that had proven, beyond all doubt, that when it came to survival, no creature in the galaxy could match the ferocity of the human spirit.